All right. Well, Anne Abel, author of Maddie, Milo and Me, is welcoming herself to This is 50 Freedom Through Passions. Anne, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to have you here and looking forward to this interview because you have a doozy of a story. And I can tell you already, the book, everybody that's listening, the book is amazing. It's such a great, relatable story, and you've told the story, you've written the story in such a beautiful way. So give us a little bit of a backstory and let's get into the interview.
Well, it's really good to be here. I'm 71. My first memoir, Maddie, Milo and Me, was published in April 2024. My second memoir, High Hopes, Bruce Springsteen and Me, will be published in September 2025. I've suffered with lifelong depression. I grew up in an emotionally abusive family. I was told never to speak because I didn't have anything interesting to say. As part of a midlife career change, going from chemical engineering, which my parents forced me to major in, even though I cannot add three numbers together, I got an MFA in creative nonfiction. And for decades, I worked for various publications for editors, and I could write anything anyone asked me to write about. But if I ever sat down and tried to write about myself or my family, my mind just went blank, and all I could hear was, "So what, who cares? You have nothing interesting to say." And this debilitating writer's block for decades, it made me feel even worse about myself. It deepened my depression. But here I am now at the age of 71. I have two memoirs out, and I have a third one in the works. And I'm really excited to share with people how I overcame these seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
Absolutely. And when you and I were on our pre-call and you were telling me a little bit about your background, a part of it was so relatable, not that I had parents that said the exact same things that your parents had said, but there's that sort of emotional abuse that you had mentioned that can really become quite debilitating to anybody. And at some point, you really got to come through for yourself and create this level of worthiness, I guess, in your mind that makes you say, you know what, I am worthy to do the things that I'm worth, that I'm going to do. And for you, writing your first memoir, for sure, Maddie, Milo and Me, for me, it's like, how did you find it in yourself? You just had mentioned in your introduction that you have severe writer block. Where do you get the strength, I guess, to get started?
Well, actually, writing the memoirs, again, I'm 71 when my first book was published. I'll be 72 when the second one comes out. And it was kind of a fluke of events, but I've suffered with depression my whole life. I'd have had in my 50s, and then when I was in my 50s, I had 3 regimens of ECT. I was hospitalized twice. And then when I was 6, I'd been teaching at a community college for 5 years. I loved it. The structure, the focus. I loved teaching the kids. Even, I always found one who wanted to learn. And then this the 6th year, the 5th week of the semester, I had this horribly violent class. And after having one desk too many thrown at me, I walked out the door one morning and I thought, that's it. I am never coming back. But I was panicking because my husband travels a lot. My kids are grown. I was home alone. And without the structure and focus of the classroom, I was terrified that I would fall into the abyss. I was not going to have more ECT. I wasn't going inpatient. And a year earlier, at the age of 59, I went to my first concert. I grew up basically in a little family cult. I was of the age when the Beatles came, to the United States. I didn't listen to the Beatles. My kids took me to a Bruce Springsteen concert when I was 59. I only went because I wanted to spend time with them. But then, as the story goes, as the crowd mysteriously rose in unison, I rose too, and up on the screen was the face of a man with the kindest, biggest smile I had ever seen. And for the next 3+ hours, that man's energy, enthusiasm, and humanity made me feel like I had a chance. So the day I was driving home from school, panicking about what I was going to do, I remembered somewhere I'd seen that Bruce Springsteen, this was October, was going to be touring in Australia in February. Now, I hate to travel, I hate to be alone, but I was desperate. I went home and the first thing I did, I didn't even say hello to my dogs. I just sat down. I Googled Australia travel agents. I wrote to 5. The first one who emailed me the next day, I booked the trip, and I went. Now I'll say, if I could have just died, I know it sounds horrible to say, I would have. I wasn't going for fun. I mean, Bruce Springsteen was fun, but I wasn't going across the world for fun. I was going because I was grasping onto a lifeline. And 12 people, friends and acquaintances, said to me before I left, write to me and tell me about your trip. And that was all I needed. I got on the plane in Philadelphia and I just started writing. And I had told the travel agent, I only want to do 3 things in Australia. I want to work out, I want to see 8 Bruce Springsteen concerts, and I want to write. And when I said that, I didn't even know where write came from. I hadn't thought about writing in all the time I'd been teaching. I'd been happy teaching other people to write. But I
Yeah.
think my will to survive, my instinct to survive, my will to be happy somehow just bubbled up and said, I want to write. And these 12 people gave me the permission, like knowing my parents said I had nothing interesting to say, and that was always in my brain. But here were 12 people who said, I want to hear what's going on. And oh my God, every morning, and it turned out I ended up staying in the same hotel as Bruce Springsteen and a lot of the E Street Band. And there's nothing I like more than being a fly on a wall. And I'd
Okay.
never been a fly on an A-list wall. So, but that wasn't even, I didn't write, but I would sit down, I'd read my 3 or 4 newspapers, eat breakfast, and I would write for 2, 3 hours, maybe 4 hours. Sometimes I know this sounds, people would get annoyed with me. I wouldn't leave the hotel. I mean, I was just watching and writing. And it was that. So I came home with many, many pages, and it was wonderful. But then I had all these stories. I was so excited. I love
Yeah.
stories. I love hearing them. I love telling them. And couldn't wait to get home and tell everybody my stories. And the other thing is, when I was in Australia, strangers would come up to me, young people, old people, they'd hear what I was doing and they'd say, you're so courageous. My mother just retired. We can't get her off the couch. We can't even get her to go to a movie. And whereas at home, my friends were rolling their eyes saying, oh, it must be nice to be able to just go off to Australia and follow Bruce Springsteen. They didn't understand how hard I was fighting for my life. And I came home and I realized that these people just wanted to see me as a depressed person. They didn't want to know the real me. They didn't want to hear my stories. It's almost like they wanted some kind of, was it Schadenfreude? They just wanted to see me depressed. And
Yeah.
I did not go on this trip to change. I did not. But I will tell you, I came home a force to be reckoned with. And I'll just add, my husband and I had been happily married 35 years. For 2 years, I mean, we were literally throwing dishes, our crate and barrel dishes. We were throwing them on the floor and fighting. He had a lawyer. I mean, we're back together and everything's fine. But I mean, I was just like, I wasn't going to take this from people anymore. And I got rid of all those friends in Philadelphia. My husband had been unhappy at work for a few years, but he's a great guy, but he's not a fighter. In a fight or flight, he takes flight and I fight. And I came back and said, you've got to do something. And we ended up going to Chicago for him, which saved his career. And it was 4 months. In January, it was 8 degrees. I had no idea what I was going to do in Chicago. I signed up for improv, which I quickly pretty much flunked out of. And then I came home, it's 8 degrees out. I said to my new dog walker, "What do you do when you're not walking dogs?" And she said, "I host a storytelling open mic." I'd never heard of storytelling, and that set me on my path.
And that storytelling mic is the moth.
No, that wasn't
No.
that was,
Okay.
there were a string of open mics that someone had started in Chicago. So I went just to see, they were in the,
Okay, so hold on. I'm going to hold you there for just 2 seconds because I'm going to catch up to the trip to Australia. So you had not written anything before you went to Australia. Is this correct? Okay, so your friends are saying, stay in touch, write us an email, tell us what you're doing. And what you realized was, hey, I kind of actually like this writing. And so when you were writing those emails, were you actually sending them or were
oh yes,
you? Yeah,
I,
okay.
and there were pages. I had one, Andy, my husband, and one friend actually would write back and respond. I mean, there were pages, and I had some deep thought. I read a New York article. Roger Angel, I think he was like 90. He turned 90, and he wrote this beautiful piece in the New Yorker about getting old. And I mean, I had time to really think about lots of things. And the concerts actually were really, much of them were very moving. I learned the concerts helped me. I mean, they actually inspired me in ways that I go into in the second book. I mean, I was just a sponge. I was just I mean, it was hard. Oh my God, I was suffering with depression. I was having problems with one of my oldest sons. I mean, there were days, I was suffering, but I was there. And also for 26 days, the only people I talked to really were people I was paying for something. I mean, it got
Yes.
increasingly more and more lonely. I did talk, I mean, I would talk to my husband on the phone, but 26 days is a long time to be alone.
Absolutely. But when I think about that, I think about, your like the feeling of I've had enough and it's either I got to do something or that's the end for me sort of thing. And you're feeling a bit unworthy and so you're writing these emails. Did the emails then become the, sort of the book like when you right so most people wouldn't even attempt to write a book in that stage. You probably didn't even know you were actually creating a book.
I knew.
um,
And no, wait, I will tell you something. I came home, and of course, I thought, and when I went to this open mic, I knew I had one
okay,
story that no, even my parents couldn't say wasn't a story. The trip about going to Australia, I knew that was a
okay,
story, even with all these horrible voices. So I worked on that story. And for an open mic, it was 7 minutes. And I came up with the 7 minute story. And I got up and told it. And for the different thing about storytelling is after you tell it, unlike sitting at your computer and you're all by yourself, people came up to me afterwards and gave me like really encouraging feedback. And then I started working on other stories and I started okay, I will tell you how, and at one point, shortly after I got back from Australia, I sat down and I tried to write about my trip. And within 2 minutes, I was under the table. And I actually looked at the emails I had written. This is after people were just being so horrible to me.
yeah,
And it was actually really painful to look at them because in these emails, my energy was palpable. My excitement, my energy of like, oh my God, here I'm getting chills just remembering it.
right,
Look at this is the world. Let me tell you what's going on here. Just the excitement that I was writing. And then I thought people would want to hear about it when I got home, and they just shut me down. So when I looked at them shortly after this was happening, I felt really sad that I had been so naive to think that people would be as excited as I was for me. And I just put them away.
hmm
And then I started doing this storytelling stuff in Chicago. And I was doing the moth and I was doing pretty well. I was doing okay, but I didn't really have any training. So I contacted a coach, a storytelling coach, to see if she could help me. And the first thing she said to me was, if I could wave a magic wand and grant you one wish, what would it be? And she took me by surprise. I thought she'd want to know my goals as a storyteller.
Yeah.
And I said, write a book. And she said, well, then that's what you have to do. I mean, I had never, I had thought of it when I came home, but that had just gone out, you know, and I knew she was right. And for 3 months, I just fought myself. I didn't know what to do. And I just got angrier and angrier and angrier at myself for not doing it. And I work out every day. I don't question it. I just do it. And I know I'm going to feel better. So finally, after 3 months, I was just feeling so bad. I thought, you've got to do, you can't, after you don't question working out, you're going to work out, and then you are just going to sit down at your desk for 2 hours. And I had the emails printed out, and I was 11 o'clock, and I said, okay, you're here till 1 o'clock. I looked at page one, and I thought, okay, you start at the beginning. And I'm not saying it wasn't just what was in those emails, because another thing that happened was I go off on tangents. I'm probably doing that now. And anything that would come into my head as I'm writing, I would have to write it, because if I started to think, does this belong here? I would just erase everything and be under the table.
Right.
So I just wrote, and I used my husband as my muse. Because again, I needed someone to, and he likes my story. So I was typing for him, and each day at the end of 2 hours, he's not a writer, he's an economist. He'd read what I'd write, and he'd fix the commas, and he'd say, good, keep going.
Yeah.
It took a while, but the first draft was 1,000 pages. And I think
Wow.
everything that had happened to me in my life up until that point is in those 1,000 pages.
Right. So when you think about, there's so many things I want to ask you about. Let's go. I'm going to just dive into a little bit about the very beginning when you were writing those emails. I don't know where you were at. Well, I guess the question is, where were you at on your healing journey of being a child that was growing up in this, sort of terrible household? And did the writing the emails that eventually, do you think that was what sort of, I guess, removed a scab, if you will, if that's the best way I can say it, to becoming sort of this healing journey or a healing tool for your healing journey? And like, how did you, when you were writing, because in Maddie, Milo and Me, you do bring up some of your childhood. Obviously, you talk about your first dog and things like that. And I often wonder, like, what was the process of, what was the feeling when you were writing those emails, knowing that they, like, you didn't know at the time that they were going to be this sort of this catalyst for writing a book. Then you had the aha moment of writing these books, and you were using the emails as sort of inspiration to kind of get more focused. You hire a coach, a storytelling coach, and she probably helped to sort of shape what your story should be, and then leaving out for memoir two the other pieces. So where do you feel that sort of, like, how did you navigate those moments, I guess?
I'm not sure what moments you're talking about. I've worked with a therapist probably for 40 years. I mean, I haven't seen her in 10
Mhm.
years. We've Zoomed. But when my oldest son was 5, and I was driving him on the 10-minute drive to school, and within 2 minutes, he said he forgot his lunchbox, and I started screaming at him. And then I just pulled over to the side of the road, and I was sobbing, and I was apologizing. And I knew I did not want to parent the way I had been parented. And we had just moved to Philadelphia, and someone had given me the name of a therapist who did help with career changes, because I knew I needed not to be a chemical engineer. So I just called her. I mean, I had her name. I called her. I'd never been in therapy before. I went to see her. I told her about the lunchbox. I was scared. I mean, I didn't know what to say. And then she said, tell me about your mother. And there has not been a silence since. And I don't know if it was a year later or 2 years later or 8 months, she told me I was depressed. I had no idea. I was
Mhm.
shocked. I thought this was how you're supposed to feel. I didn't realize, that I mean, I knew something was wrong. I had a golden resume. I chemical engineering and MBA from the University of Chicago. I had worked for these companies. And when I moved to this new city and I started meeting the mothers of my kids' um, classmates, and they just, one of them was a lawyer. She loved doing, corporate mergers. Another one, she had turned her dining room into an aviary for lost birds, and she made teddy bears. But these people I met, they got this joy from what they were doing, and the only thing
Oh
I
my
liked to
God.
do was watch people. I mean, that's the only thing I knew. So at one point, this therapist said to me, she said, I didn't even know what an interest pattern was. I knew I wanted to help my children find their passion, but I didn't know about this thing. I didn't even know the term interest pattern because in my family, everything I thought and did and said was dictated. And I just wanted to achieve it and do what they want. I never thought about what I wanted. And at one point, I remember the therapist said, "Okay, you're at the kindergarten level of interest patterns." And then I read this book by Ann Beatty, and this was like in the mid 80s, called Picturing Will, and the protagonist was a photographer, and she would go in and I was, oh my God, that would be great. I could just go to PTA meetings, I could go to all these things and watch people. So I studied photography for 2 years and I liked it. I hated fiddling with the camera. I hated having the camera between me and the subject. And then one day, the student who was really good said to me, "You should spend more time in the darkroom." And I had spent my whole life doing things I should. I literally walked out of the photography department. I found the name of a creative writing teacher. This was at the Community College of Philadelphia. I found her in her office. It was middle of March. I said, "Can I sit in on your class?" And she said, "Sure." That was the next day. I get chills just remembering this. And I sat down in this class. I'm not a poetry person, but they were going over this poem, I remember. I mean, I was probably late 30s, 40. It was a poem about being on a highway and the cars, you're with these cars and you look at these people and you're all together, but you will never see any of these people again. And I was like, oh my God, do other people actually think like this? And it was,
Mhm.
so that set me on my path to writing.
Okay, so when you think about that, sort of the relatable struggles, sort of was what you're alluding to there. For other people who might be feeling a bit paralyzed by their own struggles, what do you think the hardest part about writing a book and like overcoming that sort of struggle? And what would you tell somebody, this is gonna happen to you. This, and when it does, do this.
First of all, I think my you need someone to champion. You need someone to keep telling you, no, you're not a piece of shit. No, just no, just do it, just do it, just do it. I mean, every time I left my therapist's office, hope is a really important thing. It gives you the courage and the fortitude to do the hard work that needs to be done. And I would get up, I would stand at the door and look at her and say, "Do you think there's hope?" And she would say yes.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, for the rest of the day into like, that really made me feel better. Her confirming that there was hope for me. That hope is so important, and finding something to hope for.
That's really interesting. I honestly don't know if I have I mean, obviously, yes, I hope this works out, or I hope this, but I don't know if I've ever heard it in that sort of intensity where maybe I would say, for me, I would be like, oh, well, do you think I'm good enough to do that? What is your sort of definition of that hope?
Of hope, that things will get better. That if I keep plodding along, if I keep doing this, um, I'll get better. And I'll tell you, when I first started seeing her, one day she had an emergency, and you know, I forget if she was late or she canceled. And I came in the next time and I said, "I feel so stupid. You've got these people, these emergencies, and I'm just coming in here whining." And she said, "No." She said, "Because you come in every week and you're doing the work, you won't be an emergency, and
Mhm.
that made me feel like that was that made me feel better because it wasn't belittling. Like my father would when I was 16, I told my father, and my father was a scary guy. I don't even know why I said this to him. I said, I forget, I don't feel well. And he said, well, on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being you're fine and 10 being you want to kill yourself, where do you put yourself? And I was 16, I'd never thought of killing myself
Killing
or
your yeah.
suicide. But with him, he used to say the problem is you don't have big enough problems. That's the problem with you. You don't have
Mhm.
really anything to worry about. I sent him the first thing I had published after I got my MFA. I called him and he said, when you get a Pulitzer, I'll read something you write. My mother wouldn't even
Wow.
acknowledge that so I had nothing in me. I mean, my husband was wonderful, but I had nothing, no well of anything to keep me. So I needed this therapist to say, yes, your hope, and there's hope. Yes, baby steps. Let's just do this one thing at a time.
Let's go to the morning battle. You said something about, "Oh, I'm not a piece of shit." And so in our pre-call, you had told me that every morning well, not every morning, I don't know if it's every morning, but you do often tell yourself that you are a piece of shit. And I say that and it sounds crude, but it is what you say. And so how do you overcome that inner dialogue and then, still show up to tell your story, to do your writing, to be creative?
A couple things. I mean, once that voice comes in my head, you know, I know you just shut it down. I mean, and I find routines are really, really helpful for me.
Routines.
Yes.
Okay.
I wake up, I hear that voice, I slam it down, I get up, and I go through, I love reading news. I go, you're going to have breakfast and you're going to read the newspaper. And I love reading newspapers. So that,
Mhm.
I take it that far. Don't think past that. Just think about reading the newspapers. And when I can't, I'm 71, so I end up having various problems and I'm waylaid. But, most of the time, then it's time. The first thing, if I have to get up at 4 in the morning to work out before I have to do something, I will do that because, and I feel horrible. And my husband, if he's here, I'll say, oh my God, I feel so bad. I can't do this. He's like, this is always the hardest part of the day for you. And again, I turn off, I did it today. I turn off my brain. I do either an elliptical or a bike, 45 minutes elliptical, 50 minutes on a bike. I get on and, 45 minutes and you go, oh my God, I have 44 more minutes. I can't do it. And I just say, just do 1 minute. Don't think about minute 43. Just think about minute. And I listen to the same Bruce Springsteen album. I've been listening to it. And I just say to myself, look, you always feel better when you get off. Don't think about it. Just do it. I love that Nike slogan, just do it. I mean, he must have had something similar. And my mother died 3 or 4 years ago. Sometime during the and I will tell you, since she died, I am so much better off. This huge cloud just
Wow.
lifted. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel like there's someone out there trying to make trouble for me. So that,
Or that you're trying to validate yourself for.
yeah, but I had stopped talking to her in
Okay.
the last 5 or so years, but she was going after my children. And she was very smart, she was psychologically savvy, and she was always doing things. But so she died, and I sounds like a terrible thing to say, but it was really liberating. My father died 6 months earlier. He was only 99% bad, and I was. Oh, and at the end, he tried to connect with me. He wrote. I got this email. I have weeks, not months. And at first, I was real. If you want to talk to me, call me. And at first, I was really angry. He was like 93. Like, well, why did you wait till now? But then I
Mhm.
thought, well, at least he did it. At least he's doing it now. And we would have these. He was in hospice, and were talking. He didn't really want to talk to me, but I think he was trying to do the right thing. And then, do you know what? At one point, my brother-in-law calls me and he says, "Your mother doesn't want you speaking to your father anymore." And I said, "First of all, you shouldn't have given me that message, you know,
Mhm.
number one." And my father hated to be bothered with personnel problems. I didn't know what to do. And here he's on his deathbed. But I called him and I said, I told him what happened. And to my shock, he got really angry at her. It used to be he would get angry at me, like, "Don't bother me with this nonsense." But so he had 1% of goodness in him. And to be honest, um, he kept me in the will. I was shocked that I have two sisters. We hadn't spoken in years, and he wasn't nice to me. And my mother tried after he died to get me cut out, but he had made it so that she couldn't do it. So that's like how sick these people are. And it's like a breath of fresh. Here I am. I'm 71, and you know what? I have physical my hip go or whatever, little problems,
Yep.
whatever. But I don't have once I get over the morning thing, I don't have the angst that I had. I mean, growing up until when my kids were growing up, my mother would just up pull the rug out from under me, and it was really hard. It was really, really hard.
So, in all of that trauma and all of that pain, how did you find the courage to face all of that and write it down for really the world to read, see, hear?
Well, first of all, my mother was always like I always wanted to write about, but she was so underhanded and so diabolical. There was always my father who I ended up, if I could write, an email to someone because he was easier to show. He threw the dog down the stairs and killed him. He did this. My mother, she would plan these things. It would take 2 months for her plan to come to fruition. But I started writing Maddie, Milo, and Me, and somehow I felt like I nailed her. Um, I I don't I don't know if it was distance. I I was able, people who read it, my husband read it, my therapist read it, and they said, "You got your mother. You showed your mother." And actually now this third memoir I'm writing, because people have been like on Instagram, or I had to go on social media for this book. They want to know about my upbringing. They want to know about Andy. And so, actually, when I can't, last year I had a horrible Achilles tendon. I couldn't for months, and it was horrible because so I I felt horrible, but I would sit down at my desk at 9 o'clock because I needed to do something. I couldn't work out, and I just started writing, and it turned out I wrote 200 pages that will, I think, be the third memoir. It's called in my computer. It's called Marriage. I just wrote about. That's the title. I mean, my mother started telling me when I was 11, the most important thing you'll do in your life is marry, and if you don't marry someone Jewish, I will disown you. I didn't know what disown meant, but I could tell from her.
Mhm.
So I went to college basically to find a husband and to moonlight as a chemical engineer. And
Right.
um and
I love that you said that. Like, I went to college to moonlight as a chemical engineer and find a husband. So it's great. And speaking of your husband and your kids, and you didn't want to have that same upbringing for them, and so you're very cautious of not making that happen or letting that happen, even though maybe parts of it did show through. I mean, I think even myself, when I think about growing up, I grew up in, very sort of manipulative type of situation as well. And you just hope, like, I'm never going to be like my parents, but it's just, it comes out. So, like, you're sitting there and you didn't realize you were depressed. That was probably such an awakening. But often people who are depressed don't really have the ability to finish what they start, right? They're on the couch. Oh, I'll get to it. So what strategies
I have to tell
or,
you, first of all, and I think
okay,
it's in the book. I think one of the chapters begins, I was never the depressed mother who was lying in bed when her kids came home. First, my kids gave me
okay.
joy. My kids, I were wonderful. I loved picking them from school. I loved hearing what they did at school, helping them. Talking to them gave me energy. Another thing is, used to say to them, and I still say on my tombstone, I want you to write, she tried and she tried and she tried.
Let's try.
I have so much self discipline and so much. Actually, the only non negative word my parents ever used to describe me was persevering. Because
Mhm.
actually, in my I didn't have a choice. Like, it was do it or incur their wrath. So I learned to just do it. I didn't have to like it. I just had to do it. For years, I didn't write. I didn't couldn't write about me. If someone wrote me an email and I and they
Yeah, everything was great. Yeah, it
and
was all good here.
they were interested in me, I could write 10 pages, for that, like in those days, that was the writing I did. If someone wrote and said, so what did your, mother do or whatever, then I could go on. But I didn't write for me. That was what, I mean, I tried to write about my mother. I did all these snippets of things I started, but I couldn't do it. And I tried to write about my father, but, it was like, so what, who cares?
So how did you find the courage then? Like a lot of people, it's sort of what you're kind of saying there. It's like we don't go out there and we don't tell everybody, oh yeah, my life sucks and is shit and this and like my mom was this. I mean, to me sometimes like people are, oh no, everything's good, and it's just everything's rose colored glasses. So how did you find the courage to be sort of
I'm not
vulnerable?
like that. I'm just
Yeah.
completely honest. And actually, I come
So
home.
you've always been completely honest right from the very
I
beginning?
come home from a. I mean, I had a few good friends, and I'd come home from a horrible trip to my parents, and it probably was too much. I would be going
Hmm.
on. I mean, and they were good listeners, but um,
You weren't worried about how they might perceive you or
no,
anything like that?
you know what? Um, no, I am who I have to say that. Of course, I wanted people to like. I mean, I didn't walk up to every stranger and start telling them
Yeah.
all my dark secrets. But my good friends, they knew what was going on. I don't know that they understood it, and probably it was sometimes overload for people. After an incident. I mean, because no one could really understand
Yeah.
mother. I mean, um, I, I
Well,
mean,
when you think about, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm very honest about who I am. Um,
Mhm.
I just another thing I thought while you were talking. Yes, I was a, a very nurturing, unconditional love mother, but I have to say, it didn't quite have the happy ending I would have hoped for, because I think I kind of overdid it, and I didn't teach my kids anything to appreciate me. I mean, I did all this stuff to help them, but I never said even Mother's Day or my birthday, I didn't make any. I was so busy dealing with my mother on Mother's Day. I was like, I don't.
Mhm.
Who cares? I don't care about me. But then what happened is that I have three sons. They grew up and they married women, and I really, it's getting better now. One son, my oldest son, we were like soulmates. We would finish each
Mhm.
other's sentences growing when he was growing up. And he got married, and for 10 years, his wife and it was just, they were so abusive and of me, and it kept pushing me closer and closer to the abyss. And finally, I just sent him an email. This was 3.5 years ago, and and my husband and I, it was hiatus. We need a hiatus from our relationship. We need you to think about it. And it was 2.5 years. We didn't talk to him, and he would call on Mother's Day and holiday, leave this canned message, and we didn't um, we didn't pick it up. And then actually in June, he left a message on my. I saw my phone ring. It was a Sunday. It wasn't a holiday. It was nothing. And then I listened to the voicemail, and his voice sounded a little different. It sounded different. And then he left a voicemail on my husband's phone, and he had the same reaction independently, and he was coming to New York for a conference. Could he come and talk to us. And we were actually leaving town the day, so he came in a day early, and we sat down. And I told him all, and I couldn't mention his wife. I mean, his wife.
Yeah.
We had a huge fight way back, and she said to me when we were making up, I don't know why he said this, but on our second date, he told me, I know how to love because of the love I have for my mother and the love she has for me. And this girl is competitive and insecure. And I think she heard that, and I had to be out of the picture. And so she got me out of the picture. Um, and he was like complicit in it. So we're now talking. But what I'm saying is, I just wanted to nurture them. And I think I over nurtured to some extent.
I think, you know what, I think that as mothers, it's such a relatable thing, because for me, it's this sort of the same thing. I don't want my kids to grow up like how I did. And so then you overdo and overdo, give, give, give. And really what I've realized is I just became a self-proclaimed enabler, which was terrible as well. So I've got a couple more questions for you, and more now kind of moving to the sort of moments of light, if you will, where, in the darkness of your past, what were the moments, big or small, that really kept you going, and that gave you strength? I know there was that one time where, one desk too many has been thrown at me. That's it. But I mean, there had to have been other moments, even when you were younger, and what just sort of kept you going?
Well, I, I know this sounds crazy, but I loved my parents and I just wanted to be in their periphery. And that's what kept me going then, was just doing. If I just kept doing what they told me to do and doing, then that was hope. I was
Hmm.
hopeful that they would accept me, which they never did. And another thing that might be we always thought I was an introvert, but when my husband and I were having problems when I came back from Australia, we took a Myers-Briggs test, and it turns out I'm an extrovert and he's an introvert. I was an extrovert in depressed clothing. And here's the crazy thing. The first time I went to inpatient to a psychiatric hospital, I'm not going to say, and I had ECT, I'm not going to say I loved it, but I had a great time. I mean, once I got in there was a group of people, that, it was just the camaraderie. I mean,
Hmm.
that gave me
Feeling of
energy.
yeah,
And,
yeah, for sure.
I don't know if going in these Bruce Springs, and then I went to my first concert ever, and it was, I mean, that's a whole nother story, but just his magnetism and the camaraderie in when you're in the energy. I was, you know what, I here's something I realized about me. I'm open. Like,
Mhm.
I didn't want my first dog. I didn't want that Maddie at all. But we went to get her, and the moment I saw her, my heart just opened up. Like, I didn't hold it. I didn't want to go to this concert. I knew nothing. I was
Yeah.
not. But this man shows up on the screen, and my heart just opened, and I just took it all in. Um, so I think that's something, being open to things and not saying, I don't
Yeah.
want a dog. Okay, we're going to get it, but I don't want, just like letting it sounds like a cliche to say, let your heart be open. But I mean, that moment at that first Bruce Springsteen concert, because my daughter and we went because her parents were Springsteen fans, and it was her first concert. Um, and she changed my life by taking me to that concert.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
often wonder, do you think the book would have ever been written? Do you think the next
no,
one
none of this,
exactly.
none
So,
of this.
and you said, like, open heart. I think open heart, open mind, and there's so many times where I felt, "Oh God, I don't wanna go to this thing tonight,"
Yeah,
or, "I don't wanna go and do that." But then I go, and then I think, "Oh my
yeah.
God, that was so good. I'm so glad I
Exactly.
went."
And that's
So,
the thing about being depressed. Like, you don't want to, but you just go. And sometimes
yeah.
they say the best part about going is coming home. But yes, I push myself. I just push and push and push.
What do you think these memoirs are doing for you and for the people who read them?
Um, well, they are a life. Let's start with me because I know that best. These books are an absolute lifeline for me. Look, I'm talking to you. I've
Yeah.
talked to so many people. I'm connecting to the world. I mean, there's a world out there, and through this book, I'm connecting to these people, the other authors who published with me, the publicists, I mean, people like you, and then people who write to me about the book. I mean, that's why I'm writing a third book, because I'm 71. I figure I have another 10 years I've got to fill up. I've got the second one coming out next year. It's just so it's energizing for me. And then people have written to me, they find my website, or they call me, I don't, and they tell me what how they relate to what I'm saying, and
Mhm.
in so many different ways. And it's not about the dogs. It's not, yeah,
Yeah,
there's two dog names on the cover and two dogs, really adorable dogs on the cover, but it's a book about life. It's a book about
absolutely.
coping with what you're given. You and I'll tell you another thing I realized talking to people about this book. When I decided to keep Milo, I mean, it was instinctive. He was a monster. He was sedated. He was beautiful. We get him home. He was a tiger. He was horrible. But my right away, I just was keeping him. I could not send him back to the bed of rags. And people for years at the time and for years after, even now, they'll say, that was amazing how you kept Milo. And I never questioned it. But now, as I've talked to people about the dogs and about my upbringing, my mother used to say to me all the time, frequently, I was only 22 when you were born. I didn't want to have you. I had other things I wanted to do. And I think that deep down, Milo, we were the third family Milo had been with in 18 months. And I think that deep down, I just connected with Milo, and I wanted to do for him what no one had been able to do for me. No one wanted me. No one wanted Milo. And I was going to try. I didn't know if I could live with him, but I knew I couldn't live if I didn't try. And I think that's why that I mean, I never put it together until I started talking about my family. And I just,
Mhm. And it comes out in the book though too. I mean, you do talk a little bit about like, oh wow, I mean, you talked about the dog, possibly being sedated when you first picked him up, and then but yeah, no, I we didn't for everybody that's listening, we didn't get into the whole nitty gritty of the book because essentially your whole story is the book, really, and they're going to have to read High Hopes to know if you actually did meet Bruce Springsteen and get a picture with him and have a guitar on your wall. But I just want to thank you and for sharing your story and for telling such a beautiful story. It's really well told. I'm going to say because it's like I said, I just don't even know if you can say it's a written. It's a story, and I think people are connecting will connect with the story in a lot of different ways. So, thank you for joining me today.
well, thank you for having me, Lynette.
Okay, and I hope to talk to you again when High Hopes comes out at the end of mid
Okay,
2025.
September 23rd, 2025.
Sounds good. Thanks, Anne.
Bye bye.